I was just watching a video of a guy, he's an American, and he has lived in London for the last 13 years. And he was talking about his accent. And it occurred to me that this is a video I probably have been wanting to make for a while. And it boils down to my accent. Just the last week, I met a new friend, and he said, "Oh wow, you have a very strange accent. Where are you from?" And I get this quite a lot. As I'm traveling, as I'm living in my home country, I always get people asking, "Where are you from?" And people never assume that I'm from Singapore. And I think and my accent is very interesting because it has evolved over time. It continuously evolves, and I do notice myself code switching in different situations. So I'm born in Singapore, but I've also lived in 5 other countries. And so I have this really strange accent now. I don't think it's anything in particular. People usually like to guess the UK or Australia. I've never lived in Australia, I've only lived in the UK. And people usually would guess Australia or the UK, and sometimes random people will say, "Oh, are you American?" Because you sound foreign enough, but not quite British. I would say that over my time, my accent, I think if I can categorize it, which my friend has categorized it, and kudos to him, I think that's how I would categorize it too. It's just properly enunciated words. So imagine a Singaporean newscaster reporting the news in proper English. And I think that is my accent. I think the accent kind of evolved a lot more when I was living in Hong Kong. And when I was living in Hong Kong, because my friends came from all over the world, and before that I was already speaking properly, I guess you would say so, because in Singapore people use a slang called Singlish, and it has a lot of jargons, it has a lot of slang words, it has a mix of a lot of different kind of languages or dialects. And I don't know, growing up, my parents taught us never to use that. You should always speak in good English, not in the received pronunciation way, because we don't live in the UK, but in the equivalent. You have to speak properly, you have to enunciate your words properly. So yeah, of course I used the accents. Of course I had a Singaporean accent growing up, but it was never very strong. And over the years, as I moved and as I started to live abroad, I was speaking a lot clearly, because I find that the Singaporean accent does not enunciate the words very well, and it is quite difficult to understand. It's quite monotonous. So unless you can get the context of it, it is quite difficult to understand. It's not a language that is just written or said. There's a lot of tonality involved, and the grammatical structure only makes sense if you understand, say, Mandarin, for example, because then the grammatical structure of Mandarin gets transposed into the English sentence structure. And unless you understand that little nuances, it's very difficult to understand Singaporeans. And I had a lot of this experience because after living abroad, I would come home for a bit and I can't understand what people were saying. I remember moving back from the UK to Singapore, and I was back for I think a couple of weeks in summer in Singapore. And I couldn't understand what people were saying. I could not understand. The sentence structures did not make sense because, again, they were borrowed from the other languages. The words used did not make sense. The way they were enunciating the words it just didn't make sense to me. And my head just could not compute what was being said. And when I finally moved back to Singapore, I actually took some time to go to the forums, and that's also where I discovered a lot more forums where people will type as they speak, and I can slowly hear the voices hear the accent in my head and slowly get used to that. All right, but let's talk. Okay, so it took me some time to finally understand the Singapore accent much better. I don't always understand it. In fact, one time I hired this lady in the company, and she has such a strong Singapore accent that I couldn't understand half of what she was saying. As a matter of fact, I had to get my other teammate and I will ask her, hey, could you translate what she was saying? Because I couldn't understand it. It reminded me of when I was in Scotland and I was in Edinburgh. The taxi driver, he's from Edinburgh, and he spoke in such a thick accent with lots of slangs, and I could not understand it. My ex grew up or spent half of his time in London, half of his time in Edinburgh. So he was kind of translating that for me from Scottish English to British English. So that was quite funny. Anyway, so it took me some time to adapt to the Singapore English. And today I speak like this. I speak like this normally. I would say sometimes I could hear myself, like how I speak now is how I hear myself in my head. And sometimes it's a little bit more Singaporean, sometimes it's a little bit more English. I would catch myself thinking in my head, whoa, that was very English in the way I enunciated my words. So I thought that is quite weird. And I think I will point to a couple of different things. So if I'm reading an English book, if it's by, because I listen to audiobooks, it's by an English author, or I'm reading a physical book written by an English author, my sentence structure or the things in my head will be configured in the English way a little bit more. Or if I watch an English movie, it just gets integrated into my operating system of the moment. But if I do not do that, and I would say that I have my Singaporean accent shown, obviously, when I am with my family. I think they are the only people that I code switch when I'm with them, and I sound a lot more Singaporean there. So when I'm spending time with them, I will speak in a Singaporean accent. Sometimes my head doesn't really speak in a Singaporean accent per se, but it sounds like a Singaporean newscaster. Yeah, that's the word. So I still sound Singaporean. If you put me abroad and I speak the way I'm speaking right now, which I always do, a Singaporean living abroad can tell that I'm Singaporean. And that happened when I was in Vienna or Paris. I was in a bakery, I was getting some bread, and I was speaking just as usual, like this. Someone who's not from Singapore would not take note that this is a Singaporean accent that's just well enunciated. But the lady in the shop, there's a customer there as well, and she's a Singaporean living abroad for a couple of years now, and she noticed, she picked it up, she's like, oh, you're Singaporean? I said, yes, I am. So I think accents are very, very interesting, because even if I'm speaking in a Singaporean accent, and I think I do speak in a Singaporean accent, it's just not the very strong ones with the slangs involved. It's still quite global, quite international. But if you put me abroad, you can hear, if you put me beside someone speaking the London English, you can hear a very big difference. So you put me beside someone from Melbourne, you can hear the difference. One thing I did notice though, okay, so one thing I noticed when I'm living abroad, when I'm living in the UK, I don't know how, but I started to develop a very strong English accent, very strong. It's strange because the other day, because I make a lot of conferences and I make a lot of videos for work stuff, and the other day I stumbled upon this old video, like a 2018 or 2019 video, and that was the time I was living in the UK. And the video, like the person in the video is me, but it doesn't sound anything like that. It sounded British. It was strange. So yeah, and then I slowly got rid of that. By being in Singapore, it slowly went away, and I think I just neutralized my accent to what I have today. But my accent has definitely evolved over the years. Now, however, when I am abroad, especially when I'm in the US, for some reason, when I'm speaking to people, the bit more British accent comes out. And there were many, many times I was at a hotel, at a lobby, getting a drink and just chilling before going up and ending the day. Or I'm at a restaurant. There were so many times people kept asking, are you English? Are you from the UK? And I always say, no, I've just lived there. Long time ago. But no, I'm not English. And they always assume that I'm English because of my accent. And I do notice, and I don't know how to get rid of it, I do notice when I am in a different country, primarily the US, because I used to go to the US quite a lot, I will have a much stronger sounding English accent. As opposed to now. Now I'm just, very neutral. This is the voice in my head, and this is how I speak. But when I'm in the US, especially the US and abroad, but I do speak in a stronger, or in a more similar to English accent kind of accent. And I wonder if that is because in my head, my personal software configuration is that I enunciate my words better. I speak better when I am in this weird semi-British Australian accent thing. Because, I can't assume where the person is from. I can't assume that they can understand this accent that I'm talking about right now, or I'm talking with right now, because this is my neutral accent. But maybe they can't understand it. And trust me, I have done this many, many times. I have done this accent, my normal accent, and I've gone to restaurants in Singapore. I've been on the call with people in Singapore. They just cannot understand me at all. I've pretty much given up. But if I use the more well-enunciated accent, which to people it sounds more British or it sounds more Australian, people understand me. So I think I code switch in a way where people can understand. Now, that brings to the point of living in Singapore. Because I live in Singapore and I am spending more time in Singapore now as opposed to spending, maybe 65% of my time abroad. I spend most of my time in Singapore right now. And I do notice a big challenge when I try to speak English in the more local setting. So the way I look at Singapore, at least the way I live at the river. And the left side of the river is the very Western. Okay, let's put it Western. The left side of the river is more Western. And I call this Western because that's where I can get my sourdough. This is where I can get my nice avocado. This is where I can get my acai. This is where I can get my organic oats. It's more of the Western version of me. The right side is where I can get the more Asian version of me, the Eastern version of me. And that's where I get my noodles. That's where I get my dumplings. That's where I get my xiaolongbao. That's where I go to the auntie or the uncle that does my shoes or does my alteration. Because I am just Asian size, so they know how to do it in the Asian size way. And so I am a mix of Eastern-West culture, very global, right? And so the river helps me to divide my East and West life. Ooh, West life. And I do notice that in the split of East and West, I have to show up in very different ways. So if I speak like this in the Eastern side of things, people will not understand me at all. And so I use a lot of Mandarin instead on the right side, which is the east side, the Asian side of the river. And this is where I speak to the uncles, the aunties, and I have a lot more of the culture, the Eastern culture. So for example, I bring gifts to the uncle who does my shoes. I bring gifts to the auntie that sells me the best eggs in the world. There's a lot more of the Eastern version of me showing up in that context. On the other hand, and that is because when I speak English, they don't understand me. On the other hand, when I go to the western side of the river, I just speak the way I am, like right now. And people will understand me. And yeah, it's just so interesting. I don't have a fixed accent. And it has evolved over time. More than 10 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, I would say my accent was more, I think the word I would use is international. Because I was living in Hong Kong then. And all my friends, as much as they were either international people, or like people who are not from Hong Kong, or they're from Hong Kong but they were educated abroad. So very, very international group of friends. And then I guess you slowly just kind of, your ears pick up certain words, right? And it just gets, it updates your software, and then you kind of think and speak like that. And I think I'm someone who probably gets, not influenced, but adapts to the context or the environment I'm in. I'm pretty sure if I were to live in Ireland for 2 years, I will have some form of a strange Irish accent. I'm very sure about that. So I'm always surprised that people can live in a country for, I don't know, a good majority of their lives and still keep their accent. That is so interesting. I've got friends who are French and they lived in, I don't know, China for decades and they still sound French. People who are Singaporeans who lived in the US for decades and they still sound Singaporean. Accents to me are so fascinating. I think my accent has been evolving quite a bit. And I'm quite curious to see if this is my accents maturing or I am going to evolve as well over time. I do notice, though, one critical point is that the content I consume definitely impacts my accent. So if I watch a lot more YouTube that is in the American accent, more specifically, the American internet accent, like an influencer accent, like a Valley Girl accent, the end of the tone of a sentence always goes up. And they speak in a very specific way. And I catch myself speaking like that, and I'm pretty sure I've got past videos that sound like that, because I seem to be capturing that accent and then speaking in that way. I really do not like that. And so, yes, now I have been actively, intentionally try to avoid the consuming content with this accent. And it's quite annoying because sometimes I do enjoy watching long form video essays, just breaking things down. And it's unfortunate that these people speak in the influencer accent and I just can't deal with it. So I just stopped watching. So I watch a lot more British YouTubers. And yeah, the accent is still there. The influencer accent is still there. It's just not as obvious. So yeah, I think that I have a very interesting accent and people have been telling me that many, many times in my life. I don't know why, I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't know how to change it. I don't think I want to change it. This is how I am. I think like this as well. So it is what it is. All right. So this will be a good, interesting documentation. Maybe 10 years later or maybe even just 3 years later. I would love to make a video like this and just compare. Till then, I have this weird, either an insect bite or a pimple. I hope it's not a pimple because I'm not someone who gets pimples. But this weird bite that I am trying to fix with retinol. Let's see if it goes away tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll use my tea tree oil. It always gets rid of things in 2 days. Bye.